Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give a few minutes till we get up to the top of the hour, and then I'll start with housekeeping remarks. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're at the top of the hour, and I see we have a number of folks logged in as attendees. So I'm going to start and read the housekeeping remarks, and then we'll get underway with our meeting. Good afternoon, and thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the STM-PR Advisory Group. Our meeting is webcast and recorded. We have two formats for participation, the Zoom web application as well as teleconference. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phones, so that there aren't any disruptions during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for advisory group members and South Coast AQMP staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means you will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raise hand button. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when time. Please treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you're being away. This afternoon, we have a fun to go through. First off, by introducing key staff, Sarah Reese. I'm the Deputy Executive Planning at South Coast AQMD, principles by which we meet federal and state air quality standards. I'm just going to go around as I see folks on the camera to introduce them. So I'm going to pivot to Mike Kraus. Mike, if you can introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our public workshop. We're super excited about rolling out the plan, and I hope you are too. My name is Mike Kraus. I'm Assistant Deputy Executive Officer under Planning and Rules under Sarah. And I'm going to toss it over to Sang-Mi, Dr. Lee.
Good afternoon. I'm Sang-Mi Lee, Planning and Rules Manager overseeing AQMP in assistance to Sarah and Mike Kraus. Thank you.
Mike Morris, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Morris, Planning and Rules Manager. Heather?
Good afternoon as well. My name is Heather Farr. I am also a Planning and Rules Manager. How about Barbara Radline?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Radline. I'm Program Supervisor of the CEQA team, and I'll be walking you through the CEQA scoping portion of today's presentation.
But Catherine?
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Roberts. I'm an attorney in the General Counsel's office.
And Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Vlasich. I'm an air quality specialist in the Socioeconomic group, and I'll be taking the portion of the presentation on the socioeconomic impact analysis. Thanks.
Great. So As I mentioned, we have a packed agenda, so a lot of material that we're excited to walk you guys through and have a good discussion today. We're going to give an overview of where we are with the draft 2022 Air Quality Management Plan that Sang-Mi will be providing. And then we'll be pivoting to talking about our obligations under the California Environmental Quality Act and the scoping work that we're doing there. And then finally, Brian's going to give an overview of where we are with our socioeconomic analysis that goes along with this. So some pretty meaty topics, and we're excited to have the discussion. Oh, and I just see someone joining that I would like to introduce. So Barbara Baird, could you go introduce yourself? I think Barbara's frozen, so we'll maybe come back to her. So anyway, so before we get started, I did want to start with a few words just to kind of give some context. So as I mentioned, this is the blueprint on how we're going to meet federal air quality standards. This particular plan is focused on meeting the 2015 8-hour ozone standard. And it's a really daunting and challenging plan. We had a lot of challenge with our last air quality management plan, which was in 2016. That was addressing the 1997 ozone standard, the 2008 ozone standard, as well as some of the PM standards. While this plan is just focused on the 2015 ozone standard, that is a much more stringent standard than the previous ones. So as challenging as our last AQMP was, the bar has been raised on this one. And we estimate that in 2037, which is the date by which we need to attain this standard, we'll need to reduce NOx emissions by 71 to 72% over what reductions that we have from rules and programs currently on books. That's a staggering emission reduction that we need to be able to achieve. We have outlined a plan by which we think we can get there, but one thing that's going to be critical in our ability to be able to attain that standard and get those emission reductions is going to be to address federal sources of emissions. And by that, I mean the mobile sources that are subject to federal regulatory authority. So those be trucks, ships, locomotives, airplanes, off-road equipment, and that kind. We do know that EPA is currently working on a national rule for heavy-duty trucks on a NOx emission standard. We appreciate that that's happening. It's been over 20 years since EPA last revised that rule. But that rule by itself isn't going to be enough. EPA's own projections show that in 2045, even implementing the most stringent option that EPA is proposing right now, our design values for ozone are going to be still in the 90s. For this 2015 standard, we need to be at 70 ppb. For even the 1997 standard, we need to be down below that level. So we know that we need more than that truck rule, even though it will help. And we are continue to work with the federal government to urge them to take action on those sources. We just simply will not be able to meet the standard unless they do that. So I think that's what I want to say on introductory remarks, just give you a little bit of framing. We're going to start with the presentations. The first one will be with Sang-Mi. She'll give you the overview on the AQMP, and then we'll have some opportunity for discussion and questions after that before diving into the other presentations. So with that, Sang-Mi, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, for great introduction. That makes this presentation much easier to go through. So my name is Sang-Mi Lee. I'm Planning and Rules Manager, and then this is a brief overview of Draft 2022 Air Quality Management Plan. Next. So first, I'd like to start that there are multiple meetings with mostly similar or the same presentation slides, meaning that we'd like to offer multiple opportunities for stakeholders to participate and then present your feedbacks and opinions. And then out of the three, this is the first of the series, and then we have another one coming this evening, 6 p.m. on the third one, 6 p.m. tomorrow. Next. So we first start to who we are, who South Coast Air Quality Management District is. We are local air pollution control agencies. We are the largest among all the local air agencies in the nation. We have so large areas as shown in the picture on the right, and then we have 17 million residents. The key responsibilities we bear is we regulate emissions primarily from stationary sources. We develop and implement plans to meet national air quality standards, such as this air quality management plan we are discussing today. We manage permits and inspections of over 28,000 facilities, and we also administer incentive funding to expedite and clean up the mobile sources and engines. Next slide. So when it comes to air quality, we cannot speak without talking about health effects associated with it. Air pollution certainly contributes to the causes of death as highlighted in these tables. And then there are many heart diseases and respiratory related diseases, or even something related with premature birth and even premature death. We can see in the next slides. So next. So this set the stage. Then what is ozone? What are we talking of? The ozone is pollutants, especially when it's near surface layer meaning the level when people breathe, inhale. At this surface layer, ozone becomes air pollutants. Ozone is chemically produced in the air in the presence of the emissions of VOCs and NOx. Also, we need sunlight to promote the chemical reaction. Next slide. There are health impacts associated with ozone, and this infographics here illustrate a little more details of it, but in essence, the ozone aggravates the areas that are related with respiration. So respiratory diseases are one of the main consequences of ozone pollution. But also ozone precursor pollutants such as NOx and VOC increases PM level as well. And then PM is one of the cause of premature death in addition to other serious health effects. So this shows ozone has quite serious health impacts associated with it. Next slide. So as we discussed, ozone forms in the atmosphere in the presence of certain precursor emissions. But once ozone is formed in the atmosphere, it travels. It transports from one area to another area, such as the ozone formed in South Coast Air Basin goes to Coachella Valley. It also travels vertically. So how far up it can go up in the atmosphere determines how bad air pollution we have in so-called breathing level or inhalation level. Next. So this picture depicts what ozone does, what air quality does. For example, in 1950s, we had one of the worst air quality in the United States. The photos in the upper right showing the air quality levels in 1950s. However, the significant progress has been made in past decades. Still, a significant progress has been made. So compared to the upper right photo, the ones in lower left showing the air quality in 2017, showing a lot better. However, still, we have the worst ozone pollution in the entire nation, and then we are among the worst PM pollutions in the nation as well, indicating the challenges we face in this area. Next. So then what is air quality standard? So EPA has unique authority to set national ambient air quality standard, and this air quality standard gets reviewed periodically. So EPA sets a standard. It doesn't mean it stays forever, but it has to be reviewed periodically, and it focuses on health effect. The latest standard was set in 2015. That was for 8-hour ozone. Once a standard is set, they determine the areas that do not meet the standard, and those areas need to develop a plan to address how to meet the standard by certain timeline that's set by EPA and Clean Air Act. And in all, if an area do not meet the standard by the due date, there can be consequences such as federal sanctions or federal measures that can kick in. Next slide. So here comes air quality management plan. So there was the latest standard set in 2015 for 8-hour ozone. And then here South Coast AQMD developed air quality management plan. As Sarah described in the overview, AQMP serves as a blueprint how this region will meet the ambient air quality standard. As shown in this little icons on the right, we have a series of AQMPs, and then these four are what the major ones that developed since 2007. This AQMP is required not only by Clean Air Act or national government, but also required under California's Health and Safety Code. For this specific AQMP, we'll address the strategy to attain 2015 ozone standard as Sarah described in her introduction, and the due date is 2037. Next slide. So this AQMP is a long process that requires input from everybody. The inputs from our sister agencies such as SCAC, CARB, and US EPA. And also we're seeking for the inputs from public and stakeholders. And through this, and then we host a bunch of public process such as working group meetings, advisory group meetings, and symposiums, and then briefings to our board meetings. So this AQMP requires this integrate process. They're looking for inputs from everyone, from every agency, pretty much every agency. Next slide. Now going back to ozone levels. So we mentioned that this AQMP is addressing the plan to meet the ozone air quality standard, then where we are at. And this graph showing the ozone levels observed in South Coast Basin since 1992 to current days. And this depicts both the South Coast Basin's ozone and Coachella Valley's ozone. It is obvious that we have made significant progress, but also it is inevitable to notice a little bit of reversed trend in recent years. And then we had extensive study that indicated that this slight reverse trend was driven by poor meteorology, despite the continued emission reductions. Next slide. So then now we are acknowledging ozone is the one we are working on, then how to do ozone attainment. To do that, we have to identify key pollutants, and then NOx emission, nitrogen oxide, is the key pollutant to meet the ozone standard. The in-house analysis and also outside academics confirm that the NOx strategy is the main strategy and then the only viable path to meet the ozone standard. There are VOC reductions that can contribute, especially VOC is a precursor to PM, so reducing VOC will assist to improve PM air quality. But also, in some cases, the reducing VOC can reduce ozone levels, especially like nowadays, there are abundance of NOx. And the graphs on the right showing the basin level, the NOx emissions, and VOC emissions. NOx emission is upper graph and VOC emissions lower graph. It also compares the NOx levels that expected in current days, so-called 2018, and then future attainment year 2037. There are some NOx emission reductions expected in attainment year. However, as we will discuss in more detail in later slides, that levels of emissions expected in 2037 are not sufficient to meet ozone standard. That's why this AQMP kicks in and we develop control strategy to meet the ozone standard. Next. So more information is needed. Then where does NOx coming from? And then are they changing with time? The answer is yes. So here this pie chart is showing the contribution of NOx emissions from different sectors in 2018 and 2037. What you notice here is in 2018, there are these two big blocks of yellow and gray. Both of them are on-road and off-road sectors. They have more or less equal contribution to the total NOx in current days. However, when it comes to 2037, this yellow block representing off-road mobile sector grows significantly. That indicate that our control strategy needs to focus more on off-road sectors in addition to others. Next. So then how much emission reduction is needed to meet the 70 ppb standard? We were saying there is some level of emission reductions. As you can see, 2037 bar is lower than 2018 bar, meaning these conditions representing so-called business as usual. This reflects the regulations already adopted and expect to continue implementation till 2037. However, this current level of regulation is not enough. So if you see this bright yellow arrow that it indicates a 63-ton level. That is a so-called carrying capacity, meaning that is maximum amount of NOx emission we can accommodate while meeting the ozone standard. So this indicating this gigantic amount of reduction needed as indicated in this yellow arrow. Next slide. But here we want to kind of touch bases the commitment we made in the previous AQMPs. The latest ozone AQMP was 2016 AQMP, which addressed the target for 2023 and 2031. And then 2037 is the new target we are setting out with this new AQMP. These yellow bars are so-called business as usual, meaning that reflecting currently adopted regulations and programs. And this orange blocks are target levels. And these thick white arrows are reduction goals. You can see 2023 reduction goals, 2031 reduction goals, and the reduction goals in 2037, which is larger than any other years, that indicating the unprecedented amount of challenges to reduce NOx emissions to meet the standard by 2037. Next. Then, knowing this gigantic amount of reductions are needed, is it feasible to meet the standard in next 15 years or so? What we lay out in this plan is, yes, it is possible, but it won't be easy, but it can be achieved with the partnership and collaboration with all the stakeholders and other agencies. It will need to expand, it will be expensive, but then still, and then we will be relying on new emerging advanced technologies, but still bottom line is, it will be doable, it will be possible. Next slide. To achieve that amount of reductions, we figured innovative approaches are needed. So far, we had lots of traditional approaches that rely on regulations, tailpipe emissions, or the new engine standard or fuel improvement that was tailored for specific cases. However, the amount of reduction needed for 70 ppb ozone standard is beyond. So wherever it is needed, we need to bypass traditional method and looking for innovative solution. Next slide. So here comes the zero emission approach. How do we get there? And then what are the fuels needed for that? We cannot rely on traditional fuels. We will need to look for more innovative fuels, more cleaner fuels. And how can we make it affordable to everybody, specifically for economically distressed communities? So these were the considerations, and we try to address in the AQMP. And some of these questions will still continue. Some of the questions and discussions will continue even after the adoption of this AQMP, and then we'll continue to assist the implementation of this control strategy in the future years. Next slide. Now we delve into then what are the specific strategies to go down to such a NOx lean condition or the attainment condition. So South Coast AQMD developed this control strategy primarily for stationary and area sources. And there are 4 categories as shown here, 1 NOx control measures, and then we pursue co-benefits from greenhouse gas reductions. And then we have some limited strategic VOC measures, and there are other measures. Next. These then are NOx control measures for stationary and area sources further grouped into 3 categories: residential, commercial, and large combustion sources. The details of these measures are available online, and we released this document for public comments. So, but then among these 3, these first 2 groups are so-called residential and commercial building measures. Next slide. Delving into a little bit more details in residential and commercial building measures, these are not we are not the only entities looking into emission reduction possibilities for these areas. There are many other state and local entities and agencies pursuing the same goal, including CEC. They have Title 24 regulations. CARB also included measures targeting these sources in their draft SIP strategy. Bay Area AQMD is in the process of rulemaking, and there are many other cities in entire California that focusing on the same issue. Next slide. Then we laid out 4 steps to achieve these residential commercial buildings. First, we identified the other local and state effort. And second, we identified the zero emission technologies that are applicable for this area. And third, if needed, we would allow near zero or lower NOx technologies as offered option. And then lastly, we were looking for the incentive options to assist turnover, especially environmental justice communities. Next. So in summary, there are 2 approaches, regulatory approach and incentive approaches. Regulatory approach will require zero emission technology wherever feasible. And then also we will be amending and developing rules reflecting most updated or best available retrofit control technologies. Incentive approaches also focused on disadvantaged communities primarily and encourage earlier deployment of zero emission technologies. Next. So there are strategic VOC controls, as we mentioned, because VOC is also toxic, and then reducing VOC can improve PM air quality as well. And so if we can achieve these things in early stage, they can even further reduce the ozone exposure. Next. Moving on to mobile source measures, while California Resources laid out comprehensive plan to reduce emissions from mobile sources, South Coast AQMD also has mobile source control strategies. As laid out in this graphics, there are 4 categories that targeting this control of mobile sources strategy. So starting from next slide, we will go one by one. Next. So before we even delving into specific strategy, again, the zero emission approach is the key to attain this ozone standard. So to do so, we have different approaches. So specifically for this facility-based mobile source measures, we utilize indirect source rules. And then this indirect source rules are targeting marine ports and rail yards primarily, and also warehouse. We adopted the warehouse rule, Rule 2305 recently. And there is also voluntary approach. This approach was applied to commercial airports, which was also adopted in 2019. And then there are unique considerations for other facility-based measures as well. So next slide. And the second category is emission growth management category. In this category, we include new and need development projects. And then we also discussed the general conformity requirement. This is to make sure federal actions do not add additional emissions in the non-attainment area, and make sure there is no increase in emissions from federal actions. And then we also include clean construction policy in this category. Next slide. There are various types of incentive programs that the stakeholders can apply and encouraged to take advantage of. So for example, Replace Your Ride, small off-road exchange programs, Calm Oil programs, and Pacific Rim Initiative for marine emissions reductions. So the focus here is we take a credit from these programs, and then wherever it's feasible, we'll try to expand, and then we try to expand these existing successful programs. Next slide. So as mentioned briefly, so CARB also has released their draft 2022 state SIP strategy. CARBs have comprehensive plans for covering all the mobile source categories, but it also includes area sources such as consumer products or residential and commercial buildings. It has measures targeting on-road sources, off-road sources, and also federally international regulated sources. This pie chart on the right just graphically representing where CARB's strategy targeting for. Next slide. And then these graphics, we are borrowing from CARB's SIP strategy. It illustrating the amount of emission reductions that expected in each categories. And there are a huge amount of reductions that are needed and that are laid out in this SIP strategy as indicated in this graph. Next slide. So this is a summary of how we demonstrating attainment. So we used just 4 large groups, actually 5 large groups of air emission sources. So point and area sources, then on-road category, off-road category, ocean-going vessels, and aircraft. Here, yellow bars are so-called business as usual condition, and then orange blocks reflect the reductions expected from the strategy by South Coast AQMD and California Resources Board. Also, these reductions include the reductions expected from well-defined control measures and the incentive programs as shown in this legend. So emission reductions, actually significant of emission reductions are required from all sources. And there is one category standing out in aircraft, which does not have a defined measure yet. However, emission reduction would be absolutely critical, even for the aircraft category, including all other sources. Next slide. So this leads to the next category. So aircraft belong to federal and international jurisdiction, or in other words, regulations. But considering the amount of emission reductions required to meet ozone standard, we cannot leave any category untouched or unregulated. And unfortunately, in South Coast Air Basin, approximately 1/3 of entire emissions belong to federal and international jurisdiction. Those are, for example, ships, aircraft, locomotives, and some selected off-road equipment and heavy-duty trucks. So as mentioned, we need emission reductions from all sources. We cannot meet the standard without emission reductions from these categories. Next slide. So this graphically depicts where we are at. So if we stack all 3 blocks, that is business as usual condition expected in 2037. And starting from the bottom, this orange block, that is a carrying capacity, meaning that is the maximum amount of NOx emission we can accommodate while still meeting the ozone standard. But then, so we need to go down to this orange block level. However, this black box here, literally shown as black, is the measures that requires federal attention, because many of them, a majority of them, belongs to federal authority. This yellow block is so-called defined measures that the control authority belong to South Coast AQMD and CARB. Next slide. So with this, we are now, other than these issues we discussed in this presentation, there are also other issues. How to address Coachella Valley's attainment, because we mentioned ozone transport. They traverse from one area to another. And in the similar context, the air pollution levels in adjacent basin affect South Coast Basin. So traditionally, we always thought the South Coast Basin is exporter of the pollution to the neighbors. However, if we go down to the level we planned, and then our neighbors do not go down as clean as we do, we will turn to net importer of the air pollution. And then lastly, cost effectiveness and affordability is definitely a concern to be addressed and to be solved. Next slide. So as we mentioned briefly at the very beginning, this AQMP is a public process. We have different venues to accommodate the public's participation, like working group meetings and workshops, etc. And we actively seeking for the public input in this process. Next. This goes to this draft 2022 draft AQMP. Currently, the draft is available for public to review and provide comments. This is the web address where you can find the draft AQMP. Next. There are different ways to provide your comments. One, you can find this internet submitter form in the website shown in the previous slides. You can use email, or you can reach out to me by phone as well. Currently, we are soliciting public comments by June 21st. Next. The next step is we are going to host a series of public hearings in summer. And then we will consider this AQMP in the October board meeting. That's currently the plan. This goes to CARB and eventually to EPA. Next. You can stay informed by signing up our newsletter. We encourage the public to do so to get update about AQMP. Next. And you can also download our smartphone app. You can get not only AQMP information, but also the air quality, current air quality, and alerts, and all other exciting news. Next. And then you can also provide your air quality concerns using this information shown in this slide. Next. Going back. One slide going back. So this concludes the first presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sang-Mi. So we do have time for public comment at the end of the agenda, but we wanted to pause here to see if there were some questions, because I know we've presented a lot of content, and so I want to have a little bit of time for discussion before we can dive into the rest of the agenda. So with that, I do see one hand raised from Jesse Parks. I don't know if you have a question on this content, or it's your hands raised for public comment. Can we unmute Jesse? Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, so it was raised for public comment, but I'll wait till the next item.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll have public comment at the end after we go through all of our presentations. Okay, I have a hand up from Mark Abramowitz.
Hi, thanks for the great presentation. I had a question about one of your slides. There was a slide which says that this plan is only going to be dealing with the 8-hour standard. In the text of the AQMP, it says something a little bit different. It says that the plan will also deal with the state standards, and that you're required to deal with those state standards. So that seems to be inconsistent, as well as the carrying capacity, because I didn't see any numbers that would incorporate the carrying capacity in order to meet the state standards. So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
So Mark, I'll start, and then I'll pivot to Sang-Mi. Appreciate your question. It's a really good question. Our AQMP does look also at the state standard. That is part of our obligation under the California Clean Air Act, but the primary focus is on the federal ozone standard, because that's the one where we have an obligation, or harder obligations. The burden under the California Clean Air Act is a little different in terms of it doesn't have specific attainment dates or specific deadlines that we have to attain. But Sang-Mi, maybe you want to elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of discussions included in AQMP chapters regarding state standard and requirements. And then, Mark, as you mentioned, there is a carrying capacity portion that we are currently developing. So the draft AQMP does not specifically mention this state carrying capacity, but in the revised version, we do plan to do it. But having said that, we all know California standard is much more stringent form than national standard, even though it looks the same number as 70 ppb. So there will be a significant challenges to address the state standard.
Okay. Any other questions on the material that we've presented so far? Okay, well, seeing none, maybe we'll turn to our next presentation, and that will be by Barbara Radline. Barbara, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, so we're at the next part of this presentation. So I'm going to walk you through the CEQA scoping portion. Next slide, please. So CEQA, that's short for the California Environmental Quality Act, which is state law, and it requires evaluation of 18 environmental topic areas. And the 2022 AQMP is a project that is subject to CEQA. Now, because the AQMP contains a series of actions that are characterized as one large project in connection with the issuance of future rules, whether it's rule amendments or new rules to be adopted, as part of conducting a continuing program, the decision under CEQA is to prepare a program environmental impact report. Next slide, please. So these public workshops that we're holding also serve as a CEQA scoping meeting. And we do that during the first phase of the CEQA process, which is the notice of preparation initial study phase. And we released the document, the Notice of Preparation Initial Study, NOPIS for short, on May 13th. And so we like to hold these CEQA scopings during that comment period. Now, CEQA scoping is required for projects with potentially significant environmental impacts, but this period gives us an opportunity for you and other agencies and interested parties to find out more about the project and to provide suggestions on the scope of the CEQA analysis, additional topics to evaluate in the draft program EIR, ideas for mitigation, and ideas for project alternatives. And any scoping comments made today or comments made relative to the NOPIS will be considered when preparing the draft program EIR. Next slide, please. So this slide is a really handy dandy visual that takes you through the CEQA process. We are at the very first stage, which is the NOPIS stage. And this is where we release a 2-chapter document, gives you an idea of the project description, the objectives to meet the clean air standards, the federal standards, as well as the state standards for ozone, and to achieve the NOx reductions that are desired. And we release it for a 32-day comment period. So comment period is open and it will close on June 14th. And this is the first opportunity for the public to provide comments. The second phase will be a draft program EIR, which will have more details about the individual impact areas in the analysis. It will recap the conclusions that are in the notice of preparation, but will also identify mitigation measures for the significant impact areas, and it will analyze project alternatives. The draft program EIR will be released for a second opportunity for public comments, but it will be for a 45-day period. And so as we progress through the development of the AQMP, we will convert the draft program EIR to a final program EIR, and we'll update the proposed project as applicable. And it will include all of the comments from the NOPIS and the CEQA scoping, as well as from the draft program EIR. And when once the AQMP is scheduled to go before the governing board, there's a process for the governing board to consider the final document and adopt any mitigation monitoring reporting plan, findings, and a statement of overriding considerations, if any. Next slide, please. Okay, so the NOPIS analysis evaluated all control measures and incentive programs identified in the draft AQMP for environmental impacts. Appendix A contains a handy dandy chart of all the control measures and a summary of the analysis of which topic areas may have potentially significant impact areas. Chapter 1 provides general background information and project description, while Chapter 2 actually analyzes all 18 environmental topic areas and the impacts. And the conclusion of the NOPIS is that air quality and greenhouse gases, energy, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, noise, and solid and hazardous waste were the environmental topic areas that we are committing to evaluating further in the forthcoming draft program EIR. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the NOPIS is available for public review and comment period, which will close on June 14th at 5 p.m. The document is available online. We also have hard copies available. When we made this slide, we said it would be available in person, but unfortunately due to COVID, we are virtual. So if you need to request a hard copy, feel free to reach out by calling the number in the slide, extension 2039. Next slide, please. So for this opportunity to comment on the NOPIS, we request that you direct questions to Kevin Nee of my staff. He's on vacation this week, so unfortunately he can't be here to participate, but he'll be back next week. But all comments, if you could direct it to him and his email, or if fax is easier, feel free to fax or to send a written letter to the address on the screen. And again, any comment letters that you provide will be included in the draft program EIR, and we will prepare responses. Next slide, please. So after the NOPIS, the next part of the process is that we are going to be preparing the draft program environmental impact report. We're anticipating releasing that in July for a 45-day comment period. And we will, again, post it on our website, and we will also be sending out an email blast when it becomes available. Next slide, please. Here's the CEQA team contact information. Mike Krause, as you see on the screen, myself and Kevin Nee of my staff. Feel free to reach out to any of us should you have any questions. Next slide, please. Okay, all right. So that's the end of the presentation. I'd like to open this up take this opportunity to open this up for public comment or questions.
So again, we have public comment we're going to have at the end of after we've gone through all the presentations. But if anybody has any questions on Barbara's presentation, we can cover those quickly right now. I see two hands up. So first, phone number ending in 373. See if we can get you unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon. Hi there, Sarah and folks. This is Harvey Eder. I'm sorry, I'm calling from the hospital, right? I got an infection swelling up in my face, okay? This is real important though. I talked with Sarah about some things that there are changes that have to be dealt with. Dr. Cohen said on a week ago, it'll be tomorrow, 2 weeks, that pollution control works at 50 degrees and not at 80 degrees. If that's true,
Harvey, is this public comments or a question? Because right now we're just taking substantive questions.
Okay, has that been considered in this? And also, I want to know if the Solar New Deal from the 16 plan, as requested by Dr. Burke, which we put into the record, if anybody did anything to evaluate that, ever. If you know what the Solar New Deal is, and if you know what the Sunshot program is from the Department of Energy, model after the moonshot to get us to the moon.
Okay, Harvey.
I'm waiting for a response.
So we do consider some measures looking at solar in our AQMP. I'm not sure if we necessarily reference the Sunshot program, but there are some measures that we do look at for that.
And what were those measures?
There are various ones, Harvey. So we took a look at, like, if you look at the control measures, we sort of broke that between residential, commercial, and large combustion. But it would depend upon what the sources were. So we encourage you to take a look at those discussions, and we'll have further discussions during the rule development of those. Remember, this is a plan, so these are control measures and the concepts, like that to deliberate on as we move forward.
Unless you've addressed the 100 exhibits that we put in there, and that was it, responding to Dr. Brooks' request of us, you have not done no due diligence at all, and this is just kind of dancing around a project here, a project there. There's no systemic evaluation of the state of the art, and this is required by law at many different junctures. And it's a gross omission. It's a violation of the law. And everything should be stopped. We're considering injunction activities to force these plans, the scoping plan, to freeze right now and to implement the Solar New Deal and evaluate it and revise it. And this is the only way we're going to get anything beyond these numbers in 37 and the deaths which come to the million to million and a half of the country. And you take the average of that and 10, 20, 30% of that's here. We're talking trillions of dollars compared to the cost of the whole company just on premature deaths. And that's from Lancet in September of 18. And we discussed that from Pedro Piqueras. That's one example. This thing so permeates our culture and the process here that it's outrageous. Anyway, thank you. Bye.
Great. Thank you, Harvey. Okay, we have a hand up with the phone number ending in 682. If we can get this person unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Tom Williams in El Sereno, Northeast LA, and president of a Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. Specifically, stop using the word project description. This is a program EIR. And there should be at least one place where the program description cites what you have as current projects to be included in the program. And in the future, you will be adding projects to that list, I would assume. So it's a program EIR, not a project EIR. Oh, by the way, I did my first EIR in 1972, so I've seen it. So there's another issue as to, in a project description, usually the first section of the project description is goals and objectives. In order to do scoping, we have to know what the goals and objectives of the program are. If we don't, how can we provide alternatives to the proposed program without knowing what the objectives and thereby the alternatives could be? So either goals and objectives, purposes and needs need to be done. There's also a matter, I hope someplace there will be a discussion as to environmental justice and equity. And I'm always concerned and participated in numerous meetings regarding the I-710, I-110, SR-60 corridor, and how the worst air pollution in the worst air polluted district can be resolved, and whether that has priority as part of this program EIR. That's all for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody from CEQA wants to respond to that?
BR, do you want me to take a first crack at this and you can back me up?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Dr. Williams. Really appreciate those comments. We do agree this is a program, and we will be working on a programmatic, EIR as the next step, as Barbara had highlighted. With regards to the word project, I mean that is a very specific, as you know, term of phrase in CEQA. It's actually one of the it's spelled out in the state law as one of the necessary elements as part of the analysis. It specifically states a project description. So we do sort of view, and you're right, it's a program, but we sort of view the program is the project. So anyway, I don't want to get into semantics, but I just wanted to highlight that. You're right, goals and objectives is a very critical part, and we do rely on those when we sort of set the stage in developing those alternatives, as well as sometimes deciding whether the the alternative turns out to be feasible or not, or infeasible in that analysis. So you will find that, and we will have that in our chapter 2 of our programmatic EIR, as well as the specifics of the alternatives. With regards to EJ and equity, we did have a chapter in the AQMP on that, so I encourage you to take a look at that and comment likewise. BR, did I miss anything on that?
That's definitely the highlight reel. The project description defines the goal. The goal of the AQMP is to achieve the 8-hour federal ozone standard, as well as achieve the state standards. So that's very clearly laid out in the document.
Okay, great. And I see one more hand up for Susan Phillips. We can have her unmuted.
Yes, hi, I'm Susan Phillips from the Robert Redford Conservancy at Pitzer College. Barbara, I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about why land use and planning is not included in the significant impact focus areas, simply because it's so intimately linked to, you know, each of the environmental impact areas that you did identify as significant, particularly if you think about warehousing and logistics. So just wondered if you could give me a little bit of background regarding that.
Sure. So thank you for the question. With the land use and planning aspect, it's not that there weren't adverse impacts identified. It was that the conclusion was less than significant impacts. So I would, if you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to read Chapter 2, the land use and planning analysis. Was there something in particular of the conclusion in that chapter that you disagreed with?
I don't see.
I don't know if I can't hear anything.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong button.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll go back to it. I think that the main issue for me, and you know, with regard to what the last speaker was saying about environmental justice issues and the importance of warehousing in the logistics industry, how closely land use decision making is tied to all of these other environmental impacts. And so finding a way that this body can have more of an impact on land use decision making to me seems critical.
Well, we don't have land use authority, so that is a component. While we rely on SCAG's regional transportation plan, which includes a land use feature, but the components of the AQMD portion of the control measures don't require land use decisions to be made. And so maybe there's a bit of confusion of jurisdictional authority in how you're perceiving the land use impacts.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I have, I believe Dr. Williams has his hand up again. The 682 number. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't bring down my hand, but anyway,
okay.
I do have a comment regarding SCAG, and might say I'm familiar with the transportation analysis zones, and we're fighting an issue right now in Northeast LA as to SCAG's projections for 2029 and 2045 need to be highlighted within the AQMP because they are the basis for it. And we are finding that in many cases, we don't have enough people to provide for the jobs that SCAG has projected, and thereby they will have to commute in from other areas to our transportation analysis zones. So I'm quite concerned regarding, you depend upon SCAG's plan. Those projections of population, households, and jobs, and their transportation infrastructure is the basis for the AQMP. So I would like to see it well tied together, that is the transportation plan of SCAG's and the AQMP as to commuters. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think at this point we have there's one more hand up. I think we have Mike McCarthy.
Hi,
Mike, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I wanted to follow up on Dr. Phillips's question. So land use is certainly not an impact right now, but I would like to know if the South Coast Air Quality Management District is able to advocate for changes in CEQA to give more regulatory authority over land use decisions, since the goods movement industry is such a huge part of emissions, trucks, planes, boats, all of that is driven by warehouse space, which is being explosively growing all over my area, which is in Riverside and San Bernardino, with essentially no teeth in CEQA to make it not happen. And so can AQMD advocate to change CEQA, or is that something that is not allowed in the air quality management plan, just like you advocate for EPA to change its emissions rules?
Right. Thanks for the question, Mike. I mean, it's not just CEQA. I mean, it's the California Health and Safety Code, just overarching for our limits on authority, and that's been that way for many a decade, and leaves that authority to the local city and county planning commissions and things like that. However, having said that, what you're asking for is actually something we do have authority over, and we are working and aimed at seeking both in the plan as well as our own current existing rule and program development. And what I'm referring to are emission sources. So that while we don't have the authority to say a land use can be, a warehouse can be built at a certain location, on the other hand, that warehouse is going to be subject to our warehouse ISR rule that does seek reductions from things like from the trucks. And again, we're going to be expanding further on that in the future, both in this plan as well as in our rule development process.
Okay, I have one more hand up again. This appears that Harvey Eder has his hand up again. Harvey, do you have another question specific to this content? It appears not. Okay, hands up again. Harvey, can we unmute Harvey and see if he has a question? Again, specific for this.
Sure, you can go ahead and, there you go, Harvey. You're unmuted. Harvey, go ahead and speak.
Am I being heard? Hello?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Good afternoon again. I'm Harvey Eder. I'm talking to myself from Public Solar Power Coalition. I discussed with Sarah that PM is 90% of the deaths. Okay. The Lancet report from September of 18 said there was 1.1 to 1.5 million premature deaths a year in the United States. A million, and we use 10 to 12 million dollars per premature death. That's 10 to 12 trillion dollars and a million.
Harvey, I think this is a little off topic
for the whole country. All right. Okay.
Harvey, I think
now,
you're a little off topic for this discussion. This is specific about Barbara Redland's presentation. So maybe we can save that for general public comment at the end. All right. I think with that, we can, that's all the hands up that we have on this particular topic. So maybe we can move to our next presentation that Brian will provide as an overview of our socioeconomic analysis.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Sarah. Just want to convey that my connection at times has been a little flaky. So if there's anything that does not come through clearly, just chime in and let me know. So my name is Brian Vlasich. I work in the Planning and Rules division, specifically the Socioeconomic Impact Assessment Unit, and I'll be going over the scope of the socioeconomic report. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the socioeconomic scoping, of course, is to provide transparency and collect input on the key socioeconomic issues and potential alternatives to the planned measures. We also will discuss the draft outline and each planned component within our report that is due out later this year. The continuous stakeholder involvement via public process has two components, specifically the STMPR advisory group, which has already convened twice since last year, and another one upcoming next week, and then 3 scoping sessions in regional public workshops, and more will be announced or scheduled. Next slide, please. So the background of our report is that the socioeconomic impact assessment within the AQMP has been conducted since 1991 and is to better inform the public and policymakers, although it's not legally required, which is normally the case for our rule development process. The 2016 report added more than a dozen key recommendations from a 2014 independent review by Apt Associates. And for the forthcoming socioeconomic report, we intend to continue on those recommendations. We plan to have a draft version of our report available at the end of June, and then a later version due in September for the 30-day draft final report. Next slide, please. So the overview of the socioeconomic report, we intend to keep it as non-technical in the executive summary, which will cover the entire components of the report. Chapter 1 will, of course, be an introduction. Chapter 2 will evaluate the incremental costs and cost effectiveness of the measures proposed. Chapter 3 will have the quantified public health benefits and other non-quantified benefits. Chapter 4 will evaluate the projected macroeconomic impacts. Chapter 5 will have a sub-county distribution of cost benefits and job impacts. Chapter 6 will have an environmental justice EJ analysis. And then finally, the conclusion and future enhancements planned in future development. Of course, in addition to the report, we'll have technical appendices that will allow us to get into more detail with regard to the proposed control measures. And then we also have an extensive response to comments. Next slide, please. So what will be quantified? Of course, we plan to evaluate the measures with quantified emission reductions ready to be committed into the state implementation plan. While we generally quantify these costs for technologies and emission reductions, we evaluate emission reductions being assessed for technologies that are not yet deployed or available, and for which we may not be able to gather sufficient cost information to quantify the costs associated with those emission reductions. So to be determined still is the infrastructure costs resulting from the transition to near zero and zero emissions, but this will be to the extent that the information is available. So the regional job and macroeconomic impacts, we will not evaluate the impacts we will evaluate the impacts associated with quantified costs and public health benefits measures directly affecting the residents within our jurisdiction. And to be determined is any secondary regional impacts from the measures anticipated to directly affect the entities outside of our region. Next slide, please. So incremental costs of the plan, of course, we will evaluate the costs within each control measure in quite extensive detail. We'll evaluate the cost by affected industry, including small business, and those costs which are most likely to be incurred out of the region, such as the production of technologies that are manufactured outside of our region. Of course, many of these measures have a phased approach in terms of their implementation. So we look at the distribution of costs over time and discount their cost accordingly. And then finally, we look at the cost effectiveness of each control measure, and we present two different methodologies, which I'll explain in the next slide. One is discounted cash flow, DCF, and the other is levelized cash flow, LCF. Next slide. Okay, so this slide talks about it, on top, of course, we have a formula for DCF, and it expresses essentially in present dollars the purchase and operating costs relative to the total emission reductions within the useful life of the equipment. Alternatively, LCF expresses in an annual figure the amortized capital costs plus annual O&M costs relative to the annual emission reduction. So these are essentially two methods attempting to quantify the same thing. They are both considered acceptable cost effectiveness methodologies, and sometimes differ in terms of their overall expression. So we use an analogy at the bottom here, such as a home buying analogy. So DCF would take into account today's market home price and the money set aside today in fixed interest rate that would account for the annual costs of utilities and maintenance. LCF alternatively would take the annual fixed rate mortgage, assuming a zero down payment, and then factor in the annual cost of utilities, maintenance, and anything else for a given future year. Next slide, please. So the modeled changes in PM 2.5 and ozone concentrations is something we intend to focus on. And we estimate the changes in health incidence due to changes in health risk associated with the improvement in air quality. So the two main components of that are mortality risk, in other words, the changes in the number of premature deaths, and morbidity risk, which would be the changes in hospital admissions, ER visits, and missed work or school days. We monetize the public health benefits, and we perform sensitivity tests to the key inputs and assumptions. And then we make a qualitative discussion of the impact on improved air quality relative to visibility, material, which would be degradation of property or material goods, and then any associated benefits to agriculture, which would be increased productivity or improved yield. Next slide. So regional job and macroeconomic impacts is evaluated using a modeling platform called REMI. This will give us information relative to our inputs on the impact on jobs relative to incremental costs, the job impacts due to quantified public health benefits, the net job impacts and its distribution by industry sector or occupational earnings group, and then overall competitiveness by industry sector, which would be things like value added, cost of production, delivered prices, and imports and exports. Next slide. So the varied impacts within the South Coast, we intend to go deeper into a more granular analysis within a 21 sub-county sector of our jurisdiction. And we're going to look at costs and the distribution of public health benefits and the distribution of projected net job impacts. So what we intend to explore is to see how spatially distributed these impacts are on a finer level than the 4-county level. Of course, the environmental justice analysis is an important component of the forthcoming AQMP. In this analysis, the EJ communities will be identified using the State Senate Bill 535 definition that the AQMD currently uses for grant allocation. Additionally, we'll use other EJ definitions, incorporating additional environmental and socioeconomic indicators to provide a useful sensitivity analysis. The analysis will also show how the estimated public health benefits vary for both EJ and non-EJ communities. And in addition, we will use well-known inequality indices to evaluate how the AQMP affects health risk inequality for both EJ and non-EJ communities. Next slide. So with that, this is a simple slide of our contact information, myself in the middle and two other fantastic economists working in our group, Ryan Finseth and Elaine Shen, our current manager. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Brian, for that presentation. So at this point, if there are some questions on Brian's presentation, we'd be happy to take them. And then after that, we can go into general public comments. So I see that, I believe that's Dr. Williams' phone number ending in 682, if we can unmute him. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for that presentation and its relationship to SCAGs. And we'd like to make sure that everything is referenced or connected back to SCAD projections, because those are the basis for EJs. One of the issues that if you had a Q&A box on this particular Zoom call, it would be, are all of these slides going to be made available online someplace? I hope.
Yes, these slides are going to be available. These slides will be available online.
I believe they are already, actually, right?
Okay. I don't know if Dr. Williams, do you have another question? Wait, that's gone. Okay, Harvey Eder, I see your hand is up. Harvey, do you have a question on the socioecon analysis? Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm Harvey. I'm talking for myself and for BSPC, etc. We're of the opinion, and it's long overdue, that economics was first referred to as political economics. And the issue of control and decision-making, especially environmental justice, equity, and we first wrote on this for the PUC in 1981 with the Low-Income Solar Equity Program, saying that equity should be expanded not only to mean equal amounts of pollution in our communities and bodies, but also the equity of who controls decision-making. And what we brought up with Piketty, that 60–70% of our population see no increase in wages or equity in the last 40–50 years. And the democracy is threatened. Disinformation, which is threatening climate, and the goals of what we're trying to do.
Do you have a specific question for the material that Brian presented?
Yeah, how come political economics isn't dealt with separately in this, and control issues and the equity of worker-controlled co-ops, etc., to get this back to the community and the workers? And that's extremely important, and it's an omission, and it's a blatant omission.
Okay, we appreciate your comment, Harvey. All right, any other questions on this specific topic? Else we'll move into general public comments. Not seeing any other hands. We'll take public comment at this point. I have one hand up from Rita Loof. Go ahead, Rita.
Hi, good afternoon. Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RadTech International, and thank you for all of your presentations today and for all the work that you do. As we have seen from the first presentation, the focus of this AQMP is on federal sources, but at the practical level, stationary sources are very much regulated. So we really need to support incentives for stationary sources of VOCs. And one action the district can take, and that our organization has advocated for many years, is to encourage the early conversion to super compliant materials, and by amending Rule 219 to exempt materials that are well below rule limits from the requirement to have permits. The current permit requirements are costly to businesses and actually encourage the status quo, because those who want to modernize their facilities face permit fees, and that is an additional expenditure that they have to think about. There are some district rules like Rule 219, for example, that seem disconnected to the goals and priorities of the AQMP. And we really don't think that's very good public policy. And we would encourage the district to match the goals of the AQMP, which are to focus regulation on sources of NOx, match that with other rules like Rule 219 that are still really heavily impacting sources of VOCs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rita, for that comment. It's certainly something we can take under consideration. And you're right that our focus is on reducing sources of NOx, and that's mostly coming from the mobile source sector, but VOC control is important to us as well for a variety of reasons. One is we do get some limited reductions as a result of VOC control, as well as there's often other like air toxics impacts and other impacts associated with VOCs. Next hand up I have is Leah Louis Prescott.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Leah Lewis Prescott, and I work in the Oakland office of RMI. I want to say thank you to staff for your tremendous effort on this plan. I really appreciate the work that you are doing to improve the air quality and public health in the district. I'm deeply supportive of adopting zero emission technologies where possible, especially in the building sector. Buildings are the greatest source of NOx that the district has direct authority to regulate, and electric appliances are readily available for many applications, and they already achieve zero emissions. So I really appreciate the plan's commitments to pursue zero emission appliance rules across residential and commercial applications. In doing so, I recommend that the district consider the following 4 points. First, the district should begin the zero emission appliance rulemakings as soon as possible to give market actors certainty and lead time to prepare for those future implementation dates. Second, the district should consider a single implementation date for all appliance categories of a given building type, especially for new construction. This will help enable a managed transition with strategic decommissioning of the gas system. Third, the district should consider aligning its implementation dates with other regulators, including the Bay Area, which plans to require zero emission residential water heaters by 2027, as well as the California Air Resources Board, which will require zero emission commercial appliances by 2030. Aligning with other agencies can increase consistency for manufacturers that need to comply, and accelerating these dates also reflects the urgency needed to reduce pollution in the South Coast, which continues to rank among the worst air in the nation. And fourth, as the district pursues zero emission appliance incentives, it should prioritize low-income and environmental justice communities and make sure to cover necessary installation costs, such as panel upgrades, wiring, and other structural upgrades. The South Coast has identified the need for zero emission appliances for years, including in its 2016 AQMP, but it has not yet acted and has allowed buildings to become among the largest sources of NOx pollution. The districts and its communities cannot afford any more delays. The time to address building pollution is now. Thank you again for including zero emission appliance rules as control measures in this plan. I strongly support these control measures, and I urge the district to move swiftly toward adopting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, for that comment. Just one quick correction. Like you said that the buildings are the largest source of NOx, and like mobile sources still are the largest source of NOx. It's true that combustion at buildings is the largest source of NOx, or is a significant chunk of NOx from our stationary sources, but it's not the largest source. Moving on, the next hand I have up is Fernando Gaitan. Fernando, go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Fernando Gaitan with Earth Justice. Thank you so much for this presentation and for all your hard work on this plan so far. Every plan, of course, is very important, but the 2022 AQMP is perhaps the most urgent of our time, considering the attainment standards not yet met and the deadlines fast approaching. We're pleased to see that AQMD has recognized that to create meaningful path towards attainment, the deployment of zero emission solutions has to occur across all sectors. We are concerned, however, with the number of escape hatches and loopholes this plan leaves when it comes to the transition by offering broad and open-ended opportunities to allow for near zero or other alternatives where zero emissions were deemed infeasible, as presented in slide 23. Specifically, what counts as infeasible is rather broad, and it's also unclear which low NOx technology would be used as a placeholder. Recent studies have shown that we need to expedite the timeline for transitioning to zero emissions in home appliances sooner than we think. Waiting to transition to zero emissions appliances only when natural gas appliances are at their end of useful life will not allow us to meet states' targets for emissions reductions. Many gas appliances like furnaces and water heaters and boilers last longer than expected. By some estimates, in order to eliminate these appliances by 2045, California would have had to have started this transition back in 1959. To drive adoption of zero emissions appliances before gas appliances stop working, that'll take strong policy and a commitment to shorter timelines. We also strongly urge the Air District to revisit the loopholes built into the plan, which will further lock in decades of pollution, and instead use those incentives only in targeted and strategic ways that will help meet more aggressive and clearly established timelines. In a similar vein, we have been strongly opposed and we have been strong in our criticism of black box measures that delay swift action by relying on future technology developments. over 300 tons of NOx per day need to be reduced. As slide 17 optimistically states that this can be done, but only through reliance on emerging advanced technologies. If this is just a black box under a new name, we know the track record based on past plans where filling that black box with solid measures never really emerges. For example, the AQMP acknowledges that in some areas, like the ports, emissions reductions figures did not include the amounts needed to fill that black box allocations back in 2007, 2010, and 2017 AQMPs. This has left a significant gap in the region, and which the region now needs to catch up to meet. It's time for a new approach, one that looks closely at closing the gaps by tightening rules and making sure that we've exhausted all possibilities to more aggressively clamp down on emissions today, rather than waiting for solutions from the future. Finally, while authority over mobile sources certainly lies with the California Air Resources Board and the EPA, there are certainly things that AQMD can do. We strongly urge you to work quickly to strengthen the ISR rules currently being contemplated. The plan currently does not include any actual commitments from specific amounts of emissions reductions from any indirect source rules beyond warehouses. And so we hope to work with staff closely to make sure that those rules are strengthened as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those comments. The next hand I have up is Mark Abramowitz.
Thanks. I've got quite a number of comments to make on the plan, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give 3 of those here, and I'll just kind of spread some of those out at some of the other workshops. I just want to start off by saying just what a great job. This is really a monumental effort, and I understand that the district staff has just been under tremendous difficulty in terms of staffing and other issues in developing it. My first comment is under the act, the district is required to do have a substantial amount of public involvement, and I just wanted to comment that the ability for public comment and involvement so far in the development of this plan has just really been extraordinary, and maybe the best that it's ever done for any AQMP. So I just really want to compliment staff about how they've run the meetings, how they've provided the opportunity for the public to give input and taken those comments in the proper spirit, whether or not staff has agreed with them. My second comment is that at the recent retreat and going back, we've seen several analyses that have indicated that where VOC reductions are going to have the most benefit is going to be perhaps in the first 10 years of plan implementation. And I would like to suggest that that there be an immediate focus on some of those VOC reductions that might occur. And specifically, a huge impact could be made by a rulemaking that would require the use of technologies such as UV, EB, and visible light, and reflect that level of performance. Of course, not specifying those technologies, but setting the limits reflecting the ability of those technologies. My third, and that should be done right away to take advantage of the potential huge impacts in air quality that it could have in the earlier years. My third comment has to do with, and I haven't read this section of the AQMP yet, but staff indicated that it was going to be changing the cost effectiveness guidelines and just adjusting them based upon I think it was said the inflation rate or cost of living, and I would suggest that leaving the relative cost of measures to be the same as it was in the 70s and 80s is extremely inappropriate, particularly considering we have even much tougher standards. Now, the theme of the last AQMP was fair share. And while it was directed mainly at the feds who are not doing their job, clearly that's an important thing to take into account. But if you are a source that's going to be subject to some of the mobile source requirements and subject to a differing level of cost effectiveness than somebody on the stationary side, and for that ton of emission reduction, it's going to cost you twice as much or 5 times as much or 10 times as much as that stationary source, you're going to say to yourself, why isn't that stationary source doing its fair share? So there's a real issue of equity and fair share and fairness, just fundamental fairness, as well as leaving emission reductions on the table by not having cost-effective limits that are equivalent and are across the board. And the second little piece of that, well, I'm going to leave another piece for another meeting, but in any case, those are my 3 comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for those comments. Much appreciated. The next hand up we have is Jesse Parks.
Hello.
Go ahead.
My name is Jesse Parks. I'm a 20-year-old advocate intern with CEQA's My Generation campaign and a rising junior at the University of California, Riverside, pursuing a bachelor's degree in environmental and urban policy. I believe as a young person, it is valuable to advocate at this agency for climate justice and have been here since I was a 17-year-old. I believe AQMD is where science and public policy to health and the planet unite. I am here because zero emissions are the most important solution we must prioritize in all regulations, and the district also has the opportunity to be a leader in the workings with workers who are equipped with the knowledge to get us there. In the AQMP, the appliance rules and incentives for residential and commercial buildings matter to the generation and those after mine if we want to overcome the looming climate crisis. Without action, facilities within the South Coast will continue to emit overwhelming NOx emissions when we need to reduce them to 60 to 70%. By doing so, our region will meet South Coast AQMD's clean air requirements and give hope again to my generation. When I go for morning runs, I'm lucky enough to have moved from the cluster of plaza buildings I once lived by last year that emitted heavy NOx emissions and brought heavy commercial traffic. Although healthy air days are not standard, I reap the benefits of living in a non-congested area. But what about the folks who are not as privileged as I? We cannot spare anything but zero emissions. However, given that the proposed reduction is steep but necessary, we must pair incentives for zero emissions technologies with a regulatory approach. To remind everyone, South Coast is one of 2 air districts in the entire country with extreme non-attainment status. We cannot simply sit idly by anymore and let the next generation be left with a rotting world. The time for action has been no more urgent than now. What are we going to do to give the planet the urgent care that it needs? I want you all to be advised that as we transition to zero emission technology, we must prioritize low income and environmental justice communities, and in technology, we must prioritize low income and environmental justice communities and near zero or low NOx solutions are not going to get us there. Targeted incentive programs and other investments for adoption of zero emission technologies to equitably provide significant benefits in terms of affordability, quality of life, and public health to communities that need the life-saving technologies must be implemented. Without these communities, we would not have a revolving world. Often we depend on the most impacted people to do the most demanding work for the littlest incentives while they are making our lives easier. We can no longer abuse the worker bee. Thank you, and I hope these words move you positively.
Thank you, Jesse, for your comments. The next hand I have up is Sean Edgar.
Hi, how's my volume this afternoon?
Great.
Great, thanks for the opportunity to address the group today. My name's Sean Edgar, I'm the Director of Clean Fleets. I'm also associated with the California Compost Coalition and really enjoyed the dialogue earlier in this session and just wanted to contribute a few words pertaining to mobile sources. I've been working with mobile sources for over 20 years now, and it's a lot of movement. I go back to the late 90s where AQMD and Diamond Bar looked really toward advanced technologies like natural gas vehicles that are, been growing in popularity. And so my frame of reference is really the past 25 years dealing with mobile sources. And a couple of the asks that I would request specific to mobile sources would be that AQMD staff really look closely at the forthcoming CEQA document for the Advanced Clean Fleet effort that ARB is undertaking. My understanding that CEQA document will be out over the next few months. And I think it would behoove district staff to look very closely at that and also comment on that CEQA document, because I think that the challenge that we all face is that zero emission is a great goal, but in terms of the battery electric vehicle zero emission program that ARB is pushing, I'm sorry to say that zero emissions don't mean zero emissions. So what I mean by that is that in looking at the CEQA analysis, AQMD is charged with delivering near-term emissions reductions. Unfortunately, as my group and others have looked at the proposed advanced clean fleets requirements, there really are insignificant benefits for climate change emissions until the 2030 timeframe. And so in keeping with existing state law and district policy and to meet federal attainment, the second ask is that the district really promote those near-term solutions. Among those solutions are anaerobic digestion, renewable natural gas, projects that are being operated in the district today from organic residuals. If you'll notice, Los Angeles County Department of Public Works recently filed their comments with CARB on the Advanced Clean Fleets effort, recognizing that Senate Bill 1383 requires the diversion of organics from state landfills. Part of that organic diversion is well suited for anaerobic digestion technology. The fuel that results from those high solids anaerobic digestion projects, there's one that is district permitted in the Paris area, and that fuel is a carbon negative fuel. And I would think that in keeping with trying to meet near-term attainment deadlines, that district would promote near-term solutions that are delivering climate change benefits and particulate matter and NOx benefits today, and try to transition away from diesel as quickly as possible. Because unfortunately, the ACF proposal from CARB, in my humble opinion, is presenting a false choice between staying on the older diesel technology path and trying to get to the holy grail of battery electric vehicles. And unfortunately, there's going to be a huge gap while the technology develops. Because when you look at the life cycle analysis, our office recently completed, and it's been submitted to the CARB docket, an analysis of what the battery electric vehicle life cycle analyses are. And unfortunately, that life cycle analysis for batteries is not much better than diesel and not quite as good as renewable diesel when you look into the upstream energy mix that it takes to power battery electric vehicles. So that will change over time. But for now, our request is the district look into the CEQA document closely for the Advanced Clean Fleets effort, comment on it to recognize the lack of near-term emissions reductions as currently proposed. ARB could modify that, but my sense is they're going to push the battery electric vehicle only solution For heavy duty trucking, we like the possibilities for hydrogen down the road, but we'll see how that technology evolves. And I guess finally, recognizing the short-lived climate pollutant advantages that some of the in-state RNG projects deliver is really what district staff, consistent with some of your prior comment last fall. I know Mr. Nastri, had some information out in response to this particular issue. And I'll just close by our young friend Jesse that observed that environmental justice is important. I agree with that 100%. And environmental justice, barring on yesterday's EJAC committee in Sacramento, we really need to take an environmental justice for all approach. And we have to address what is banned under AB 32, which is leakage. And unfortunately, the current plan, as evidenced by the White House 100-day report on supply chain resiliency related to battery electric technology, exposes the big weakness and the big leakage of labor problems in Africa, of the not a closed loop recycling system in the US, the control of upstream materials and battery recycling by others. The US has very small reserves of lithium, cobalt, and other materials that are going to be needed to supply the battery electric battery packs for future BEVs. And so we think that battery electric vehicles currently present huge labor and huge life cycle problems as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions. So district staff, our request is that you be comprehensive in your review of the CEQA document, deliver comments that are geared toward delivering near-term emissions reductions, minimizing leakage, maximizing the environmental benefit of what can be done feasibly in the near term while other zero emission technologies develop. And I'll just close by saying the companies that I work with have been instrumental in putting out over 5,000 natural gas vehicles, most of those fueled by renewable natural gas. And the pushing of the ACF proposal over the last several years has really had a detrimental chilling effect on the folks that source cleaner vehicles. And the messaging, unfortunately, has been just drop back to diesel and don't continue to add some of the near zero renewable natural gas technologies, because for the last at least 4 years, the Air Resources Board has insisted on a program, which I believe in the near term is destined to failure if it's adopted as advertised. The ACF will not result in near-term emissions reduction. So having said all that, great dialogue today. Environmental justice should be environmental justice for all. We shouldn't be exporting our problem to rely on foreign sources of cobalt and lithium and other materials because we're stuck in this battery electric vehicle world. We should encourage in-state production of renewable natural gas, of renewable hydrogen, of other products that we know are going to deliver near-term emissions reductions. And we shouldn't go into this project with advanced clean fleets and seeking the holy grail of zero emission technologies and give up what we could have achieved over the next 1 to 2 decades while some of those zero emission technologies evolve to the point where they can serve a customer like you reliably with transportation or waste collection or recycling collection services. So I appreciate you allowing me to take the microphone and wish you luck in your continuing series of meetings. And it's been a good experience so far, and appreciate you considering our viewpoint. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those remarks. The next hand I have up is, I believe that's Dr. Williams again, the phone number 682. Can we unmute him?
We did.
Oh. Phone number, last 3 digits, 682. Are you able to unmute and talk?
I'm trying to ask to unmute, Sarah. It's not working for me. Can someone else try?
*6, Dr. Tom.
I'm having the same trouble, Mike.
Yeah. Paul, can you click the blue button that says has to
I've
unmute.
done it about a dozen times with him.
It has to come from him.
Yeah.
Any
so-
one of us.
Okay.
Yes, Tom has to unmute himself now.
Okay.
Yeah, he has to press *6.
*6, right?
Oh, Tom, if you're able,
There
there
we
you
go.
go.
He's got it.
Hey, okay. Dr. Tom Williams, Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community, specific to the CEQA scoping. We would like to have two alternatives included in the CEQA document for the project or program. And we would like to have them to be the following. By 2029, what would we have to do and how much would it cost to achieve federal standards within the South Coast Air Basin? Then by 2045, what would it take and how much would it cost to achieve California state standards? Part of my concern is that a long time ago in 1980, we were in the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History, 5th floor, and we tried to see USC across Exposition Boulevard and could not. It has improved since then, but we also had a concern that if we ever cleaned up the air pollution, so many people would want to come to LA that we might get more air pollution from those coming and traveling by car. So we're quite concerned that the AQMP include as part of its CEQA scoping two alternatives. One, achievement of the federal standards by 2029 and achievement of the state standards by 2045. That's all. I'll be here tonight too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. This is Mike Krause here. I just wanted a little quick clarification. So for the alternative, so right now what you're saying is, because right now the plan's projection to meet in 2037, you're saying an alternative would be what it would be like if we move that goal up to 2029. Is that what your request was, or you're asking?
Federal standard. Hello?
Yes. Because we have a number of standards. The reason I'm asking is because we have a number of standards, right, that we
I know.
Trying to achieve. So I'm just trying to get specific.
All federal standards compliant by 2029, which is a SCAG state. And then all state standards by 2045, which is another SCAG state, so that we can compare it to SCAG's information and to AQMP. But the basic element is, how much would it cost to clean up the mess? And what would happen if we did clean up the mess, such as population? Would we get more people coming to LA in 2045 if we could achieve California state standards? Probably. So there are some impacts, but the basic element is Fed standards by 2029, all state standards by 2045. Those will also be sent in by email to you as part of scoping comments.
Great. Appreciate that, Dr. Williams. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, that's the last of the hands that we have up for public comments. We'll do one last call for public comments. Not seeing any other hands up, I think we can conclude our meeting. So very much appreciate everybody's participation today. We will be continuing with our public workshops. We have another one this evening, same content, but just another opportunity for folks if they weren't able to participate in this one, or if you just can't get enough of AQMP and want to listen to it again. And then we'll have another one on Thursday, more oriented towards the Coachella Valley. So yes, with that, we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you very much again for your participation this afternoon.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Segmi. Thanks, BR.